Before I begin, I want to say thank you to our wonderful musicians today. We've had a lot of music already, and the choir hasn't even sung, so I think, thank you. I said, here come the ringers, and one of the ringers said, we're ding-a-lingers, or something like that. I'm just quoting them. But I really appreciate their music. And if you want to join the ringers, I'm sure Lindsay would welcome you as well. There are more tables, I believe. So maybe you're like me when someone speaks about the prophet Jonah, you immediately picture a man who is all skin and bones in the middle of a very large fish. Artists have had a lot of fun with this story over the years, but Jonah's faith story for us today is more than just a prophet of the Lord sitting in the belly of a whale or a fish. Our reading focuses on what happens after the big fish coughs him up. God once again instructs Noah to walk the streets of Nineveh and preach God's message. 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. It's a very short message, only 5 words in Hebrew, and reluctantly Jonah does it, but just 1 day's worth of walking. So he doesn't cover even the whole city. But in that 1 day, the word spread to everyone, and immediately the people of Nineveh believed God, and they then declared a fast. The king hears about it and orders all the humans and their livestock to put on sackcloth in addition to fasting. And he tells them to stop their evil behavior. And that is just what they did. God sees their earnestness, and God changes his mind and doesn't destroy them. But Jonah is furious. He camps by himself across the way so he could witness what he had hoped would be God's destruction upon the people of Nineveh. And when that didn't happen, Jonah wasted no words in telling God that God was utterly wrong. Jonah is angry that God would give this despicable city a second chance, or any chance at all. And it is true that these are particularly evil people in that day, enemies of Jonah's people, the Israelites. I have a hunch, though, that you can relate to Jonah's view. You and I all have somebody in our life, or maybe a group of people in our lives, or people that we see in the news that they have done us wrong or they have done others wrong, and they are really the opposite of all things godly. Nothing loving, nothing kind, and definitely not gentle or patient. So why would God be so gracious? To help us understand where Jonah is coming from, we need to know that he's living during a time when the Israelites were very sure in their minds that God's covenant was just for them, that they were the only favored ones in God's eyes. Now, we too may have this exclusive thinking. We sometimes think God's unconditional love and grace are meant only for Christians, and perhaps only for a particular type of Christian, our type. I thought of Jonah's attitude recently while watching one of the last episodes of Ted Lasso. Anyone here a Ted Lasso fan? I am really hoping that you watched at least the next to the last episode. Okay, good. Because it could be a spoiler alert, but if you're like me, you want to watch the whole thing over again. Ted Lasso has given us a breath of fresh air on TV. It's a popular show that has helped us go deeper in our understanding of what it means to be a kind human being in society. He's challenged us to be more thoughtful, more hope-filled. He's from Kansas. He's been hired to bring life to a losing football team in England. This is the sport that we call soccer. And as it turns out, Lasso knows nothing about soccer. He's been a college football coach in Kansas. But he has the management understanding, but most of all, he has the energy, a bit of charisma, and yet he's a bit naive and unsophisticated, a jokester, but kind and full of heart. He brings along his friend Coach Beard to help him coach the team, and they both have a lot to learn. The English culture, the food, the English euphemisms, and most importantly, they need to learn the game of soccer. They don't know what offsides is. And then again, who does? At first, the team doesn't like Lasso's folksy approach, but he soon wins them over. They embrace his call to believe. Maybe you've seen that sign somewhere on yellow paper. You can actually buy it on Amazon if you want it in your house. He invites them to believe in themselves and to each other, and they come to love his many and sometimes quirky but helpful sayings. When a player made a mistake one day, often he would say, "You know what the happiest animal on earth is? Do you know? Yes, it's a goldfish. You know why? It's got a 10-second memory. Be a goldfish. Be a goldfish." And another is, there's two buttons I never like to hit. That's the panic and the snooze. He was big on the team supporting one another and not bad-mouthing others, even their opponents. He'd say, "I promise you, there is something worse out there than being sad, and that's being alone and being sad. Ain't no one in this room alone." The team and the coaches get pretty close and support one another, and even though they are a losing team, they have spirit and they keep believing. But then one of the coaches betrays them, leaves them because he had hard feelings. Ever know anyone like that? He's jealous that Lasso is giving more attention to another coach. He is in fact wooed to be the head coach of their rival team. Coach Nate's jealousy is so strong that he becomes bitter and does all he can to sabotage the team's spirit. And this affects the team players emotionally. They begin to play poorly, or maybe even more poorly, and lose against the team that Nate is now coaching. Coach Nate does so well with this team, he becomes popular with the media and the country, but the owner of this new team has created a toxic workplace. Nate realizes that he misses the supportive environment of his old team. And he doesn't like the person that he has become. And so one day he just quits. He gives up his lucrative job as coach. Lasso's players learn about this and they want him back. They, the players, have forgiven him. Ted Lasso runs the idea past his friend Coach Beard, who responded in a very uncharacteristical way. He says, "If you want that Judas back, I'll burn this place to the ground." Sounds a bit like Jonah, doesn't it? Coach Beard has pretty much been Lasso's disciple. He's even a bit crazy like Lasso. And all along, we have seen Coach Beard being kind and forgiving. But Coach Beard doesn't have an ounce of forgiveness for Nate. Lasso then gives perhaps my favorite line in all the series. "I hope none of us are judged by the actions of our weakest moments, but rather the strength we show when and if we're given a second chance. We then learn that Coach Beard has a dark, troubled past. Lasso and Beard had been college buddies on the same college football team, but during college, Coach Beard kind of went his own way and developed a criminal history of drugs and larceny and even time in prison. We learned that at one point he reached out to Lasso for help, and Lasso invites him to come live with me. And yet, in spite of all this compassion and care, Beard ends up stealing Lasso's car. Lasso intervenes and rescues him once more. Now, Coach Beard shares all this to Nate one night, saying he wouldn't be a coach if it wasn't for Lasso giving him a second chance. And so Coach Beard invites Nate back to the team. I'm betting that each of us has a backstory. Maybe not as, larceny or drugs or whatever, but we have a backstory that we're not proud of. Maybe we're hoping that no one knows about that. Perhaps years ago you did something hurtful, or maybe just yesterday you were not so gentle or loving or kind or patient. Or just last week you stirred up dissent rather than build peace. Maybe even this morning you lacked a bit of self-control. You hit the snooze button. Each of us has had a time when we have failed. And we too don't want to be judged or labeled by that time. Even the prophet Jonah needed to see his shortcomings. It's going to take more than his time in the body of the whale, though. He doesn't see his sins, he only sees Nineveh's sins. He didn't hop on that boat to Tarshish because he was afraid of the people of Nineveh. He attempted to go 3,000 miles away in order to avoid doing something God called him to do. And he thinks that he knows better than God on how to run the world. His time inside that large fish was like a major timeout. And yet it was only the beginning of his transformation. He was willing to follow God's instruction, but his heart was not in it. A bit of a curmudgeon, a bit of holding on to grudges. You can kind of see him, marching through the town, the city. Jonah still has a long way to go to understand the supreme value God places on being compassionate to all people and their animals. I'm guessing that each of us needs a little more work done on our hearts and on our minds. We too need to come to understand that God's generous compassion is not only for us and our people, but for everyone. Can we see our neighbors as God sees them? Children of God. I believe that as we extend grace to others, even in little ways, like listening instead of judging and condemning, then, as we are generous with our compassion, God's generosity is manifest in our communities and our world. Indeed, God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Amen.